Just when I think sometimes that I've got it bad as a Bears fan, I think about Cleveland Browns fans. Yeah, can't have it much worse than them, can you? The old Cleveland Browns never made it to the Super Bowl. They leave and they go to Baltimore, become the Ravens, and they win 2 rings. The new incarnation of the Cleveland Browns have had their hopes tied to such legends as Tim Couch and Brady Quinn and Brandon Weeden. Oh, good Christ almighty. And then you look at, let's say, the 2014 draft. Just one example. When I said that they maybe should have taken somebody like Odell Beckham Jr. and Teddy Bridgewater, they took Justin Gilbert and Johnny Manziel. That's the Cleveland Browns in a nutshell. Instead of getting a real young franchise quarterback in Bridgewater and getting a big time playmaking difference maker on offense like Odell Beckham Jr., they take an immature corner in the top 10. And even they traded up from 9 to 8 in order to do so. And then they take Manziel. Oh, Christ almighty. Now, I suppose there was hope for the Cleveland Browns heading into the 2015 NFL Draft. With the trade down with Buffalo last year, where Buffalo was so desperate to make big things happen to 2014, whatever fucking reason, Cleveland Browns found themselves in a good draft position with 2 first-round picks, 2 fourth-round picks. This was a team that was sitting well, that was sitting pretty, that had a lot of options and a lot of different possibilities for what they could do in this 2015 NFL Draft. A lot of buzz was about them trying to move up to number 2 overall to be able to get their hands on Marcus Mariota. Ultimately, that didn't happen. And I say for the Cleveland Browns, from their standpoint, that was the best thing that could have happened to them. Because if you just spent a first-round pick on a quarterback last year just to turn around and trade multiple picks and potentially players in order to take another one this year, you're not accomplishing anything. All you're doing is spinning your wheels. And the Cleveland Browns are the masters of incompetence and spinning their wheels as an organization. So I wanted to see what the Browns were going to do in this year's draft. Were they going to move up? Were they going to move down? Were they going to get aggressive? Were they going to get conservative? Were they going to have an approach and a philosophy? Only time was going to tell. And now that I look at the entirety of what the Cleveland Browns did with the 2015 NFL Draft, there are things that I really like about it, but there are also things that I understand why others, especially Cleveland Browns fans, might not be that particularly happy. Now, the Cleveland Browns clearly sought out with their 2 first-round picks, in my mind, to establish a physical identity on both sides of the ball. Their offensive line they addressed with their 2nd first-round pick in Cameron Irving out of Florida State, and they focused on the defensive side of the ball, getting some meat up front in Danny Shelton, the 3-down nose tackle from Washington. Obviously, to me, that was what the Browns were looking to do. A defensive lineman with 1 pick, an offensive lineman with their other pick. For all the talk about this and that, people still talk about games are won and lost in the trenches. So on the one hand, it's kind of hard to knock the Cleveland Browns for wanting to build their team in the trenches. And when you look at the Browns, especially on the offensive side of the ball, you can start to argue that that's a strength of that team. With Joe Thomas at left tackle, Joe Bitonio inside at guard, a guy like Mitchell Schwartz outside that they probably still want to kick inside. A guy like Alex Mack, yes, coming off of an injury, but a very, very good center. Now you add a guy like Cameron Irving into the mix, a guy who could potentially play center, guard, maybe even right tackle at the NFL level. I can see why the Cleveland Browns were trying to add strength to strength. I can also see why they wanted to address the defensive line with that 12th overall pick with Danny Shelton, because in my mind, he was a top 10 pick in this draft, and their defense was absolutely brutally bad and embarrassingly bad for a defensive-minded coach like a Mike Pettin. Now, in day 2, I thought this team did pretty well for themselves, getting a guy like Nate Orchard from Utah, a guy who doesn't leap off the charts at you with measurables and how he works out. Just a really good, solid football player that brings a lot to that defensive scheme of the Cleveland Browns. And then in round 3, getting the Duke Johnson. Now, it's kind of, again, adding strength to strength. You've already got Terrence West. You've got Isaiah Crowell. You throw a Duke Johnson into the mix. But to me, Duke Johnson is the most complete of those running backs, and at some point in time in 2015 will be the starting running back for the Cleveland Browns. Then they peeled up to the tail portion of round number 3 to get a guy like Xavier Cooper, who I thought maybe was a little bit better suited to play in a 4-3, honestly, but I could see where some teams would envision him to be a good fit as a 5 technique and a 3-4. Some good day 2 values there. No real reaches, guys that you could actually potentially argue based off of where they were drafted were good values, if not flat out steals. And then speaking of steals, you look at day 3, the fact they were able to get a guy like Ifo Ekpreolamu to follow them all the way at round number 7. That's the type of gamble you take late into the draft. A guy that was a productive college player, that had some issues in terms of his measurables, some major red flags in terms of injuries. He's a 7th round pick. He is a guy with NFL talent. He can play at the NFL level. If nothing else, he's a slot corner at the NFL level. And you got him in the 7th round. That's what good organizations and good drafting teams do. You take those type of gambles late in the draft. Because if they don't pan out, you only spend a 7th round pick. And if they do pan out, then it's the type of steal that people are praising you for years. So in terms of this draft, there was, like I said, quite a bit to like about it when it comes to the Cleveland Browns. In terms of their best picks, I love the pick of Danny Shelton at number 12 for them. I really, really do. I understand it. I get it. And I think he's an instantly huge, necessary upgrade in the middle of that Cleveland Browns defense. I also really thought that Nate Orchard was an outstanding pick for them in round number 2. Barkevious Mingo is a guy that really hasn't brought much to the table as an edge rusher in his 2 years in the league. They needed more of an edge rushing threat opposite Paul Kruger, and I think they just got it in Nate Orchard. In terms of potential steals, I look at Duke Johnson, and I see a guy that could be a 3-down running back at the NFL level. Ekpreolamu, getting him in round number 7, at worst, a slot corner in the NFL, which is basically a starting position in today's game. A player that could surprise a little bit, I think, is their safety from the 4th round from Northwestern, Ibrahim Campbell. Here's a guy that I think, if anything else, you're talking about having some depth in the secondary. You're having to match up with opposing slot receivers and tight ends. Now you bring in Campbell. He's a guy that you could do different things with. He could be your 3rd safety. Maybe he ends up being a potential safety, provide you some insurance in case Tyshawn Gibson doesn't come back right away from his injury. He's a guy that could surprise in terms of his productivity. But it just wouldn't be the Browns if I didn't question certain things about their draft and didn't really wonder what the hell they were doing. They waited until the 4th round to finally address wide receiver. At least they did address wide receiver this year. But then when they finally did in the 4th round, they took Vince Mayo. I'm sorry, there were better wide receivers on the board at that point in time. And then they waited until the 6th round to take a tight end. So you decided you've got Josh Gordon out for the year probably due to suspension. You let Jordan Cameron go via free agency. So if Johnny Manziel comes back and gets the starting job, who the fuck is he throwing the football to? And don't tell me Dwayne Bowe or Brian Hartline you should go stand in the corner. Seriously. I mean, seriously. You wait until the 4th round to take a wide receiver, and then that's the receiver that you take? And then 6th round for a tight end. No. No. Why are the Cleveland Browns so dense when it comes to this shit? It's the whole thing of, it'd be different if they were a team that won championships recently, like the Ravens or the Patriots or the Seahawks or the Packers. A team like that, if they sit there and had this type of philosophy, then who am I to really say? Who are we to really say? Who are we to really question? We can and we still will, but we probably will be proven wrong at some point in time. But the Cleveland Browns are so steadfast, sure shit of themselves and defiant in their beliefs that they're doing things the right fucking way when clearly they're fucking not. They didn't address wide receiver last year in that incredibly loaded wide receiver class. They had Odell Beckham Jr. staring them flat in the fucking face, so of course they sat there and took Justin Gilbert, and even you could argue later in round 1 they had Kelvin Benjamin staring him square in the fucking face after they traded up, as well as Teddy Bridgewater, so of course instead they took Johnny fucking Football. They didn't address wide receiver once. One of the biggest weaknesses on that team last year, surprise, surprise, was the wide receiver position. For Christ's sakes, Miles Austin was fucking starting for them. Because you're expecting any young quarterback to come in and succeed with nobody to throw the ball to a wide receiver or at fucking tight end. Why in the hell you would not address these positions absolutely defies logic to me. Just absolutely defies logic to me. And no, the Browns organization can't say we're right, you're wrong, because clearly based off of their history, they're fucking wrong consistently. Look, they had some really good picks in this draft. I understand what they were doing with Shelton and Irving. I like the Shelton pick a lot more than the Irving pick. But again, when you go into it, yeah, it's great. They got other guys too, like Nate Orchard, Duke Johnson, Xavier Cooper, Ibrahim Campbell, Ifo Ekpreolomu. But why don't they address wide receiver and tight end? How stupid can you be? And even at number 12, as much as I like Danny Shelton, you've got Devontae Parker staring you in the fucking face. In my opinion, you need the number 1 wide receiver as badly as anything. You roll the dice, with Devontae Parker at number 12, and then you hope Danny Shelton either falls to you at number 19 or you execute a trade up in order to get him and make sure that you come out of the draft with an impact defender in the middle of your defense and a number 1 wide receiver. Instead, they took the nose tackle number 12, and based off of what happened in this draft, that might end up being a little high, even though I'm okay with it. And then in 19, they took a guy that's best positioned as center, where you're basically potentially drafting him to replace Alex Mack, who can be opted out of the contract after 2015. It's just, what in the hell are they doing? All the while, they're not addressing wide receiver or tight end. Even as much as I like Nate Orchard, why the hell wouldn't you take Max Williams from Minnesota in the 2nd round? Who the hell do you have a tight end? And then even when you look at the big picture of things, the Cleveland Browns basically took last year's number 4 overall pick. They turned it into the 9th pick, and then a 1st and 4th rounder this year. And then they took that 9th pick, turned it into the 8th pick. You get what I'm saying? So basically, they traded Sammy Watkins for Justin Gilbert, Cameron Irving, and Ibrahim Campbell. That's the Browns for you. I mean, did they really come out ahead? What the hell did Gilbert do last year? Is Irving even going to start as a rookie? Again, the biggest problem I have with this draft for the Cleveland Browns is that they have these huge needs. And in particular, this is another really good wide receiver class. When they finally do address it in day 3, they reach for a guy that probably should have been drafted 1 to 2 rounds later when there were better options on the board. This is what dumb organizations do, and this is why the Browns are the Browns. They still had a good draft. I think they got several potential future starters and a couple of really, really good players. But it's those failures to address those key positions that absolutely defy logic. I'm going to give the Browns a grade of a B-, in part because I think of the depth and talent that they accumulated overall in this draft. But at the end of the day, they didn't take Odell Beckham Jr. last year. They didn't just sit there and stay put at number 4 and take Sammy Watkins. And they didn't get a playmaker, a wide receiver, a tight end again this year for reasons that are lost to me.